A gentleman that I personally signed here on Smackdown.
The prodigy, the chosen one, Drew McIntyre.
Let me tell you, I said Drew McIntyre's gonna have a hell of a year in 2012. They haven't had it yet.
I was the chosen one 15 years ago. Then I got fired. I beat Brock Lesnar, Goldberg, Randy Orton.
This man, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a future world heavyweight champion.
Drew McIntyre signed his initial WWE contract all the way back in 2007. From extreme Scottish backyard wrestling to forming some notable friendships along the way in promotions like Irish Whip Wrestling, British Championship Wrestling, and Insane Championship Wrestling. And it was at an Irish Whip Wrestling show where future WWE superstars such as Sheamus, Wade Barrett, and Drew McIntyre would be performing, and all three were offered WWE contracts by a visiting John Laurinaitis. Drew McIntyre's story is a tale of two careers. On one half, you have a young superstar who was handpicked chosen by the chairman himself to be one of the top stars of WWE's future. And through a series of missed timings, unfortunate events, and personal losses, the potential of this star was never realized. And on the other half, you have a well-respected superstar who's a fighting champion with a huge disdain for CM Punk. McIntyre is a former Intercontinental Champion, two-time Tag Team Champion, a former NXT Champion, and a three-time WWE Champion. What's up guys, it's Kaze here. If you're a fan of wrestling or wrestling-related content, consider subscribing, as we're on the road to 5,000 subs and this channel covers wrestling both inside and outside the ring. But without further ado, let's get into it. His debut was on the October 12, 2007 episode of Smackdown. Accompanied by Dave Taylor, he went on to use the most devastating move in all of sports entertainment, the surprise roll-up, to go on and defeat Zack Ryder? After being signed, Drew spent only about 3 weeks in WWE's developmental system. To the surprise of many backstage, he received a call from Howard Finkel, letting him know about being in this match. And moving from Scotland to America and also performing in front of 20,000 people ended up being a bit humbling for Drew, as he himself began pushing to go back to developmental. And soon after that, he was sent to WWE's new developmental system, FCW. This is where Drew really got to hone in his chosen one gimmick and work side by side with Dusty Rhodes to really develop his mic skills. Man, Dusty Rhodes is so goated. RIP. On one faithful day, while looking for some talent to waste on ECW, Vince McMahon would be sitting ringside at an FCW taping. And after staring Vince down both before and after the match, he had the boss's attention. This moment led to Vince deciding he was going to keep McIntyre off of ECW and have him debut as the chosen one on SmackDown. On September 25th, 2009, Drew McIntyre was introduced by Vince McMahon himself.
A man who is extraordinarily aggressive, handsome son of a gun as well.
Ew, Vince, relax. Much like the real-life scenario, Drew was portrayed as Vince McMahon's handpicked chosen star to lead WWE into the future. McIntyre had the look, and his promo skills were just good enough to get him by.
Well, I'd like to say I'm surprised, but I'm not.
However, he lacked the aura that was needed in order to get fans behind him. His re-debut was against R-Truth later that night, where he attacked him before the match, this being his first official feud on the main roster. Over the following weeks, he would continue to attack R-Truth, all while coming across as some spoiled kid with a temper whose dad owns the company. Kinda like Shane McMahon in real life. Drew made a toast to the SmackDown locker room, however, he was pretty aura deficient at the time, so he was met with crickets.
And here's to the party, just getting started.
And a beatdown from R-Truth. It was also around this time that Drew would have a match with Charlie Haas, and after a botched Future Shock DDT, Haas would be suffering a broken neck. The incident didn't really affect Drew's career though, as he went on to be booked pretty strong over the next several weeks. His feud with R-Truth concluded at Hell in a Cell 2009, with Drew picking up the victory. R-Truth went on to be a national treasure, and as for Drew, the next month he competed in a 7-on-7 Survivor Series match, being a part of Team Miz going up against Team Morrison. And Drew had a pretty good showing. He eliminated Evan Bourne and Matt Hardy, and his team ended up winning the match. The victory helped Drew earn an IC title shot the next month at TLC versus John Morrison. And it was on December 13th, 2009, just 2 months after re-debuting, that Drew would win the Intercontinental Championship. He was able to defend his title against John Morrison the next month at the Royal Rumble, and everything was going well for Drew until the lead up to WrestleMania 26. According to Sheamus's commentary in Drew's WWE 24 special, it was originally planned for Drew to face The Undertaker at WrestleMania 26. However, plans would change once Shawn Michaels decided he wanted to face The Undertaker in his retirement match. The next best thing for Drew was to be a part of the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania. However, plans would go awry again as last minute it was decided Jack Swagger would win the briefcase. A decision that no one saw coming or wanted. Still being the IC champion, Drew needed to gain some momentum, so he started feuding with Teddy Long of all people, and subsequently Matt Hardy as well. Jeff Hardy had recently left the company, and the most notable thing Matt Hardy had done around this time was feuding with Jeff Hardy, leading him to randomly be involved in feuds like this and also putting over younger talent. On the May 7th episode of Smackdown, Drew would continuously attack Matt Hardy, leading to Teddy Long stripping him of the title. Kinda. The next week he was reinstated by Vince McMahon, and would later announce that Matt Hardy had been suspended from all WWE programming. And for the next few weeks, every time Teddy would make a decision regarding Drew McIntyre, Vince McMahon would completely little bro him and just undermine everything he did. This led the beef between Drew and Teddy to get even more heated. Elsewhere, Kofi Kingston wins a tournament to determine the #1 contender for the IC title. The match would take place at WWE Over the Limit 2010, a historically D-tier pay-per-view. It was here where McIntyre would lose the Intercontinental Championship to Kofi Kingston, ending his reign at 161 days, this unimpressively being the 27th longest Intercontinental Championship reign. On the June 21st, 2010 episode of Raw, Vince McMahon would be on the receiving end of a TV-PG brutal attack from the Nexus. And Vince was kind of a crash test dummy in this era of WWE. Being attacked by the Nexus, getting punt kicked by Randy Orton, that one time that sign landed on him, and that one time I took his wallet. The attack left Vince off TV for a few weeks, and this left Teddy to finally get his revenge over Drew over the next few weeks with no intervention. After losing to Matt Hardy on the June 25th episode of SmackDown, Teddy informed Drew that his work visa had expired and that he was being deported to Scotland immediately.
Somebody's visa has expired.
And I initially thought, wow, what a super realistic way to get him off TV. Turns out, his work visa actually did expire, and he was sent back to Scotland for about 2 weeks. Then he returned to SmackDown, where he begged Teddy Long for his job back. And I was never really a fan of this angle. 2010 SmackDown was a pretty tough watch at the time. You had Jack Swagger running around as World Heavyweight Champion at some point. This was that year they really tried to get Edge's spear chant over.
Spear, spear, spear.
And for the latter half of the year, World Heavyweight Champion Kane would have an incredibly mid feud with The Undertaker. This was probably the first time this feud just didn't work. And somehow Drew still managed to get lost in the shuffle. Also earlier this year, Cody Rhodes would split from Legacy and look into the mirror for what seems to be the first time.
Dash.
Drew would face Christian in the match with Cody Rhodes on commentary. This was the beginning of the two teaming up, and the next month they would win the tag team titles in a 5-team turmoil match consisting of the Usos, the Hart Dynasty, Santino Marella and Vladimir Kozlov, and Evan Bourne and Mark Henry. Like I said, SmackDown was a pretty tough watch at the time. The title win allowed them to appear on both brands, and they successfully retained the titles twice against the Hart Dynasty, before losing them to Nexus members David Otunga and
It's John Cena!
The team disbanded after this, and Drew actually hit Cody with a pretty cool callback to this later on in their career.
We were WWE Tag Team Champions.
The dashing ones.
Man, I can't believe we didn't go to the top with that name.
By this point, Drew had seemingly lost all his momentum backstage, and you can argue he never had it with the crowd to begin with. He spent the next few weeks trying to rizz up Kelly Kelly. However, I strongly advise against doing this when your aura is this insufficient.
That's really sweet, Drew. Thank you. But when did we become friends?
At the 2010 Survivor Series, McIntyre was a part of Team Del Rio going up against Team Mysterio, making it to the last man standing for his team before being eliminated by The Big Show. However, he may have recovered somewhere else.
I would never hurt you.
Drew spent weeks trying to convince Kelly Kelly that he was a genuine guy, but after attacking Trent Beretta multiple times after matches, she kept turning him down. And by this point, the ship had definitely sailed as far as him being in the main event, but now he was being involved in these semi-comedic angles, completely wiping him of any credibility. He then competed in the 2011 40-man Royal Rumble, a Royal Rumble where WWE decided they had a ton of great talent, and then realized they had built none of that talent up to be believable winners. Just comparing this Final Four to the year before was such a drastic contrast, making this Royal Rumble mostly filler and nostalgic returns. And Drew was eliminated by The Big Show again. The next month, he took part in SmackDown's Elimination Chamber for the World Heavyweight Championship, but was eliminated by Kane, and he was actually drafted to Raw shortly after. And I didn't remember this, but it was mostly because he was barely featured. I found a ton of clips of him getting beat up though.
Gosh, that's gotta hurt.
Drew went from getting the public endorsement from Vince McMahon himself to earning a SmackDown contract on the December 15th episode of WWE Superstars. However, things were a bit different this time. He continued to lose matches, and he started beefing with Teddy Long again. Never mind, things were exactly the same. Since Drew had nearly the same loss percentage as the 2023 Detroit Pistons, I'm not even kidding. Teddy Long would inform Drew that he needed to win some matches in order to justify his SmackDown contract, and Drew followed this up with an impressive 8-match losing streak. And after the last loss, he was kayfabe fired by Teddy Long.
I gave you lots of chances. I have to let you go.
Until a week later, where he was reinstated by John Laurinaitis, and would finally end his losing streak after a win over Hornswoggle. With tensions continuing to grow between John Laurinaitis and Teddy Long, the two would form their own teams and face off at WrestleMania 28. Drew was selected to be a part of Team Laurinaitis, and they went on to pick up the win, leading John Laurinaitis to be active GM over both SmackDown and Raw. Just an absolute awful time if you were like me watching on a weekly basis. And CM Punk's title reign really carried throughout this entire era. And this kind of ties into their feud down the line. Helping Laurinaitis did absolutely nothing for Drew's career. He continued to lose matches, and his role ended up being reduced to house shows and superstar episodes. He was still able to make a few SmackDown and Raw appearances. They were squash matches. When FCW rebranded to NXT in July of 2012, Drew spent a few weeks down there putting younger talent over like Seth Rollins and Bo Dallas. And there were a few main roster guys that were going down there doing the same, who also hadn't had much to do on the main roster. It wasn't until the September 21st episode of SmackDown where Drew's career would take a drastic turn.
We're a three-man band!
McIntyre alongside Jinder Mahal interfered in a match between Heath Slater and Brodus Clay. The trio then began going as the three-man band, or 3MB for short. And this was a creative decision that Drew was actually pretty upset by. Shocking, right? This is where Drew began losing a lot of his motivation to work. Their first official appearance as a group was on Miz TV at TLC 2012. Later that night, they then went on to lose to the team of The Miz, Alberto Del Rio, and the Brooklyn Brawler? And the next night on Raw, they would lose again to the team of The Miz, Alberto Del Rio, and Tommy Dreamer? And there were times on TV where you could really just see Drew's frustrations. By this point, he thought he'd be a world champion, or at the very least not wearing leather pants. According to his WWE 24 special, around this time he would begin drinking a lot more and going out as well. This kind of being the escape from the work life he was unsatisfied with. It's also definitely worth mentioning that around the time of the group forming, Drew's mother would unfortunately pass away, leading this to be one of the darkest times in Drew's life.
But to be honest, I wasn't doing anything at the time. I was just floating around, spinning my wheels.
Well, we thought we were a real rock band and acted like one and partied like one.
Where's the champagne, Heath? Where's the girls?
We would only just have short matches and show up hungover, which was wrong.
Drew's initial run with WWE ended pretty uneventfully. After a long run of embarrassing losses, on June 12, 2014, it was announced that Drew McIntyre had been released by the company.
We're gonna blow your mind. A 1, 2.
Drew was faced with a decision after his release. He actually wasn't sure if he wanted to wrestle anymore. And sometimes everything needs to go away before you realize what's really important to you. He made his first appearance under his real name, Drew Galloway, returning on July 27, 2014 at Insane Championship Wrestling, where it all started for him. And this return was huge. The pop for him was insane, and this had to be one of the purest forms of aura regeneration I've ever seen. And this homecoming was big, not only for Drew, but for the promotion itself. Soon after, he won the ICW Championship, and he began defending it internationally. These title defenses, along with him showing up in other promotions, really helped put ICW on the map. Something I found very humbling was every time he was asked about WWE, instead of blaming it on bad creative or false promises, he would almost entirely take accountability. This time around, due to Drew's work ethic, he actually became one of the biggest wrestling stars in the world. Drew had become the top champion in every promotion that he showed up in. even facing off against a multitude of former and future WWE superstars. In Drew's efforts to become the complete opposite of what he was in WWE, he ironically became everything WWE wanted in a superstar. And on April 1st, 2017, Drew would appear in the crowd of NXT Orlando. He debuted in NXT on April 12, 2017, defeating toughest man in the universe Oney Larkin, showing off the new aura he picked up from the indies. Everything was different about him since the last time WWE fans had seen him. On the July 19th episode of NXT, he would go on to beat Killian Dane in order to become #1 contender for Bobby Roode's NXT Championship. At the time, Bobby Roode was going under a bit of a resurgence as well. He was arguably the most over NXT superstar at the time. To sum it up in one word, it was... I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. The match took place at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn, and it was a pretty good match as well. I'd give it 3 out of 5 Don Cheadles. And I was pretty happy to see that Drew was finally being treated like a main star. Though this wasn't the top of the mountain just yet, this is the moment where he finally began to... Oh no, it's Adam Cole! Just seconds after winning the NXT Championship, Drew McIntyre was attacked by a debuting Adam Cole. This was still prime NXT, so almost immediately Drew had a ton of competitors for the NXT Championship. Just 1 week after winning the NXT Championship, he successfully defended it against Roderick Strong. 2 weeks later, he was challenged by Andrade, leading William Regal to make it official for War Games. And immediately after that, he would be challenged by Adam Cole. His match with Adam Cole took place at an NXT house show with special guest referee Shawn Michaels. And it was actually a really good match, 4 out of 5 Don Cheadles. However, this may not have been the best for Drew's title reign, as he was pretty banged up going into his match against Andrade the next night. And it was during this match where Drew would suffer a torn bicep, also suffering his first loss since returning to the company, with Andrade becoming the new NXT champion. The injury caused Drew to be out for about 6 months. It wasn't until April 16th, 2018, where he attacked Apollo Crews and Titus O'Neil, aligning himself with Dolph Ziggler. But unfortunately, anything associated with Dolph Ziggler around this time came with a huge loss of aura. The move turned him heel and landed him on Monday Night Raw. And initially, he was just helping Dolph Ziggler out with his feud with Seth Rollins. A pretty disappointing start to what was supposed to be a major return. The feud with Rollins continued all throughout the summer, with Drew mainly being Dolph Ziggler's enforcer. The feud culminated at SummerSlam with Seth Rollins getting some unexpected help from a returning Dean Ambrose, defeating Dolph Ziggler for the Intercontinental Championship. The next night on Raw, Dolph and Drew would beat the B Team for the Raw Tag Team Championships. The two would align themselves with Braun Strowman as he was feuding with Roman Reigns, and this caused the reforming of the Shield. This was that awful time period where Baron Corbin was running Monday Night Raw. He set up a match between Dolph Ziggler and Drew versus Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose for the tag team titles, and it took place at the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view. And it was actually a pretty solid match, 3 out of 5 Don Cheadles. Afterwards, Dolph and Drew would start telling Dean Ambrose that he didn't need the Shield, and Seth Rollins would begin telling Drew McIntyre that he didn't need Dolph Ziggler. This all led to a match at Super Showdown between the Shield versus Braun Strowman, Dolph Ziggler, and Drew McIntyre, with the Shield coming out on top. A pretty good match, and they followed it up with another one the next week on Raw. And with the power of 50-50 booking, Braun Strowman, Dolph Ziggler, and Drew McIntyre would end up winning the match. And 50-50 booking was quite the opponent at the time. Ambrose and Rollins the following week ended up beating Drew and Dolph for the Tag Team Championships. This after Braun Strowman attacks Drew during the match. Dean Ambrose would go on a turn on Seth Rollins a few weeks later, the same night Roman Reigns announces that his cancer returns, and Dolph, Drew, and Braun became the 3 best friends that anyone can. Oh hey, a face turn! So Dolph Ziggler turns on Drew after Drew is awarded Raw's Gold Medal of Excellence for being one of the sole survivors on Team Raw that year. This taking place on Drew McIntyre Appreciation Day. I guess in the end, no one needed anyone at all. Over the following weeks, Drew would continue feuding with Dolph Ziggler, as well as Finn Balor, and between the three of them, they would all interfere in each other's matches. Drew's feud with Dolph would end on December 31st in a steel cage match. Shortly after, he aligned himself with Bobby Lashley, and they started feuding against The Shield. Pretty much anytime they needed a ratings boost, they would put The Shield back together. And after losing to The Shield at Fastlane, the next night Drew would challenge Roman Reigns to a match at WrestleMania in form of a beatdown, to which Roman accepted. This was actually Drew's first singles match at WrestleMania and Roman Reigns' first WrestleMania match since announcing he was in remission. Therefore, the crowd was pretty loud for this match. and it was a pretty okay match. It lasted about 12 minutes and Roman Reigns came out with the win. And the two would dish out weekly attacks on each other, with Drew ironically becoming friends with Shane McMahon along the way. However, this didn't really help him at all, as the feud was extremely one-sided, with Roman Reigns picking up most of the victories. The feud concluded with Roman Reigns enlisting help from the dead man himself. Around this time, The Undertaker was looking for a way to end his career properly, and his match at WrestleMania with Roman Reigns was not the way anybody wanted to see him go out. The four would have a no-holds-barred tag team match at Extreme Rules, in what was a great match, 4 out of 5 Don Cheadles, with Roman Reigns and Undertaker coming out with the win. Shortly after Extreme Rules, Drew would end his association with Shane McMahon and finally continue his singles run. He continued his random match tour until it came time for the 2020 Royal Rumble, and this was arguably the best Rumble they had within the previous decade. With the absolute tragedy that took place earlier that day, the energy in that building is still something you can feel on rewatch to this day. There were a lot of great moments created from this Rumble match. You had Brock Lesnar wreaking havoc throughout the entire first half, tons of credible stars that actually could have won, and best of all, you had the return of Edge. This is something I'm sure we all thought we'd never see. The look on Edge's face told the entire story. I even almost cried, but I didn't, I swear. Drew had a great showing, eliminating 6 people, including WWE Champion Brock Lesnar, as he went on to win the whole thing. Drew wasted no time deciding on who he was going to face at WrestleMania. The very next night, he decided to challenge Brock Lesnar, turning completely face in the process. And just like that, the match was set. And just as things began to go great for Drew McIntyre, everything else in the world began to fall apart. Due to the pandemic, fans wouldn't be able to attend WWE events for the foreseeable future. And just like any other time in WWE, the show continued. On the second night of WrestleMania 36, Drew would defeat Brock Lesnar after 3 Claymore kicks to the face. After so many ups and downs throughout Drew's career, this was 13 years in the making. He would finally win the WWE Championship. Only problem was, no one was there live to see it. He made his first title defense against Big Show of all people, just 5 minutes after winning the title. The match was filmed off air and broadcasted the next night on Raw. Drew ended up winning the match, and this was actually the Big Show's 35th time turning face or heel in WWE. I'm not even kidding. Drew was portrayed as a fighting champion, and during the early parts of his reign, he would have some pretty good feuds against Seth Rollins and Bobby Lashley. And after a nothing burger of a feud with Dolph Ziggler, he began feuding with Randy Orton, and things really began to pick up. Randy Orton throughout the year had revived his old ways of becoming the Legend Killer, and he spent most of the year attacking legends. It was pretty cool. Their feud would continue over 3 pay-per-views, with Drew picking up the win at SummerSlam, at Clash of Champions in a 5 out of 5 Don Cheadle ambulance match. However, the next month, they met in a Hell in a Cell, and this is where Orton would pick up the victory, becoming a 14-time world champion. This putting an end to Drew's title reign at 202 days and giving him his first loss of 2020. McIntyre ended up regaining the championship on the November 16th episode of Raw. Becoming a 2-time world champion, he went on to have a great match with AJ Styles at TLC and subsequently The Miz after cashing in his Money in the Bank contract. And after retaining the title against Keith Lee on the January 4th episode of Raw, he was set to face Randy Orton the following week. However, the match would be canceled after McIntyre tested positive for COVID. Recovering soon after, he faced Goldberg at the 2021 Royal Rumble, giving us all a scare as we know how things like this can go. He successfully retained the title, and the next month inside Elimination Chamber, Drew would have an insane match. However, after the match, Bobby Lashley would attack Drew, allowing The Miz to cash in his reinstated Money in the Bank contract. Apparently there was a loophole in that thing. This ending Drew's second title reign at 96 days. After a short feud with Sheamus, he was back challenging Bobby Lashley for the WWE Championship at WrestleMania 37. He would fail to win back the championship. In fact, he was actually unsuccessful in his next 2 attempts over the next 2 pay-per-views to Bobby Lashley. In a triple threat match alongside Braun Strowman at WrestleMania Backlash, and in a Hell in a Cell match. On July 18th, McIntyre failed to win the Money in the Bank ladder match due to some interference from Jinder Mahal. And it was here where McIntyre made his return to the mid-card. However, this time around, it wasn't a bad thing. He was bringing a bit more credibility to the things he was doing. Not the gender stuff though, there was no helping that. He did face Big E at Crown Jewel for the WWE Championship in a losing effort. However, right after that, it was back to a nothing burger feud with Baron Corbin. This feud actually took him all the way into WrestleMania 38, where he became the first person to kick out of the End of Days, and defeating Baron Corbin. And this felt like a bit of a waste of Drew's potential on the card. After WrestleMania, he began a feud with the Bloodline, teaming up with RK Bro at WrestleMania Backlash and losing to the Bloodline, consisting of just Roman Reigns and the Usos at the time. He would go on to compete in the Money in the Bank ladder match, and it was unfortunately won by Austin Theory. On the July 29th episode of Smackdown, Drew faced off with Sheamus in a #1 contenders match for Roman Reigns' WWE Universal Championship. The match would take place on September 3rd at Clash of the Castle, where Drew failed to win the championship after an interference from a debuting Solo Sikoa. And this was famously in Drew's home country and seemingly the only chance he was going to get to win the WWE Universal Championship in front of his home country. After, he would continue a budding feud with Karrion Kross after weeks of being randomly attacked, but the gravity of the Bloodline story was just too much for anyone on WWE's roster to stay away from. Drew, alongside the Brawling Brutes and Kevin Owens, would face the Bloodline at Survivor Series War Games, and this match was absolutely incredible. After his involvement with the Bloodline, he entered the hunt for the Intercontinental Championship. After weeks of battling Gunther and Sheamus, the three had a 5-Cheeto match in the opening of Night 2 of WrestleMania 39. The match was incredibly brutal. In fact, it was this match and a culmination of everything else he had been through that took him off TV for 3 months. He returned at 2023's Money in the Bank, where he confronted Gunther and then attacked him following his title defense against Matt Riddle. He would challenge Gunther for the Intercontinental Championship at SummerSlam, and after another brutal match, Gunther came out with another victory. After losing, still semi-fresh off of his return, Drew would start to show shades of being a heel, albeit a completely justified heel. After Jey Uso would get traded to Raw, since deciding he was gonna do his own thing. Drew was one of the people who was pretty skeptical about Jey being around the roster, refusing to forget what he had done while being a part of the Bloodline. He would challenge and face Seth Rollins at Crown Jewel for the World Heavyweight Championship, and after losing, he would attack Jey Uso, helping the Judgment Day win the tag team titles. This officially turning Drew heel for the first time since 2020. In order to get the opportunity to hurt Jey Uso, he decided to team up with the Judgment Day at Survivor Series War Games to face the team of Seth Rollins, Cody Rhodes, Jey Uso, Sami Zayn, and the returning Randy Orton. Drew and the Judgment Day would end up losing the match, and to make matters even worse for Drew, the return of CM Punk was huge, and it was something that started a domino effect of storylines to unfold. Seth Rollins immediately started crashing out ringside, and there were reports that an upset Drew McIntyre was seen leaving backstage. And Drew's hatred for CM Punk may have been a bit real. It was back where CM Punk was on top that Drew was at the bottom of the card, or barely even on the card at all. And now that Drew was finally at a higher position, here was someone who walked out of the company whereas Drew was fired from the company, coming back to take the spotlight. And it wasn't until the Royal Rumble where Drew could really air out his frustrations. He was eliminated by CM Punk, but not before giving him a Future Shock DDT and tearing his tricep. Throughout WWE's history, every top star has had one rivalry that defines their career. Unless you're like John Cena, then you have like 4 or 5. And the CM Punk rivalry for Drew McIntyre is one that I feel defined his career. Suddenly, Drew's character had more motivation and more passion. Even his mic skills got a huge improvement as he was cutting some of the best promos of his career.
You never drink, you never do drugs, yet you spend all your time in rehab.
The injury to Punk cost him to be out for 8 months. And these guys took that time to turn this into one of the most heated rivalries that we've seen in the past decade. Drew began wearing t-shirts mocking CM Punk's injury, started making hilarious TikToks, and Drew went on to win the Men's Elimination Chamber match, earning a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship, still held by Seth Rollins. And in the lead up to their match at WrestleMania, Seth Rollins had his focus divided on also helping Cody Rhodes out during his feud with The Rock and Roman Reigns. Drew would continuously remind Seth Rollins that if he doesn't keep his eye on the prize, he was going to lose everything at WrestleMania. The two would face off in the opening of Night 2 of WrestleMania. After Rollins participated in a hellacious tag team match the night before, Drew would make relatively light work of Seth Rollins, afterwards taunting the title in front of CM Punk, this leading to CM Punk attacking Drew after the match and allowing Damian Priest to cash in his Money in the Bank contract. Drew was finally able to win a world championship in front of a stadium of fans, becoming a 3-time world champion for 5 minutes and 45 seconds, this being the 9th shortest world title reign in WWE history. Ironically, it was Drew not keeping his eye on the prize that cost him everything. And for the rest of the year, it was CM Punk that cost him everything, as Punk would begin to interfere in all of Drew's big opportunity matches. including ruining Drew's second chance to win a world title in front of his home crowd at Clash at the Castle. He even caused Drew to fail at his Money in the Bank cash-in. And yes, Drew was meant to be a heel. Through all of these different interferences, it became more and more justified as to why Drew would hate CM Punk. On July 22nd, it was announced that Drew McIntyre would face CM Punk at SummerSlam, with Seth Rollins being the special guest referee. And Drew was able to pick up the win. The feud would continue on to a strap match the next month, where Punk was able to pick up the win. And after another week of brutal attacks, it was announced that the two would face off inside a Hell in a Cell match at Bad Blood, and they did not disappoint. Their matches prior to this were pretty good, but this ended up being one of the most brutal Hell in a Cell matches that we had seen in more than a decade. This match was the end of their 10-month-long rivalry, and currently Drew has been off TV resting some injuries and dealing with an unspecified personal loss. I'm hoping Drew's able to take enough time off to recover, and prayers that he and his family are able to get through such a troubling time.